Let me introduce myself. I used to work at Google, then ran a startup called FutureCam, then worked as CTO of a startup. I now work as part-time CTO with multiple companies at once. Today I wanted to talk about naming. Naming is one of the important things in programming. If you name something wrongly, it can confuse people, and they may have to spend a lot of time digging something to reach a conclusion that if the naming were better, they would have the conclusion right away without having to dig through it. And when you dig, you may end up with the wrong conclusions as well. After all, you, the author, know best what something is. And not even if you can't come up with a good name, that might also be an indication that you didn't think through the abstraction properly. This is a code smell. For example, having a class called manager is a typical code smell. If you have a video manager, it means a lot of functionality regarding videos has been dumped into that class without carefully thinking it through. When you code, always take a few seconds to think of a good name for something. It's as important as writing the code. Well, maybe not as important, but very important. As the joke goes, there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming. So, with that, let's get started. Let's start by looking at the marginal tax calculator. First, notice this variable income tax rate. I did not use an abbreviation like IT rate. Avoid abbreviations. IT, what does it mean? Information technology? It can mean anything, right? It will take only a few seconds to type out a name. Unless it's a standard thing like TCP/IP, that's fine. So one is avoid abbreviations, the other is use conventions. Because when you use an abbreviation, whatever time you have saved in abbreviating it, multiple times that time will be wasted on the part of readers trying to understand. Also use the conventions for your language. For example, if a constant is conventionally named using upper caps, do that. This is especially important in dynamically typed languages where the language doesn't prevent you from changing the value. So conventions are all you have. The other thing is, if you notice the function tax fur on line 29, it doesn't say get tax fur, right? I avoid having get or other superfluous words. Calculate tax fur. If I say tax for 50,000, it's clear that the function is going to tell you how much tax you are going to pay on 50,000 rupees. So avoid these unnecessary words. Just makes the code less readable. Moving on, let's move from this Python code base to a different one, which is an Apple one. Here, notice that there are conventional words to use in languages. Shared is an Apple convention for a singleton variable. And if you have a function that creates an object, the convention is make. So use these conventions. Also avoid ambiguous terms. For example, if I say the resolution of a video is X, what does resolution mean? Is it the width? Is it the height? Is it the number of pixels? So that is why I have three accessors: width, height, and size. Even size, you could argue, is confusing. Is it the size in bytes once it's encoded? In this case, CV pixel buffer is an image, not a video, right? But still, I can say the size of the image is 100 by 100, which is a number of pixels, or I can say that the size of the image is 1 MB, which is the file size in bytes once it's encoded. Maybe I should have called this dimensions. That would be clearer. So whenever you come up with a name, think about how someone might misinterpret it and clarify it. Let's go to another project, which is FutureCam. The website is here if you want to find out what it's about. Here, look at these names: Frame Producer and Frame Blender. You can guess that the Frame Producer produces frames, and the Frame Blender blends together multiple frames to create an output. Good naming means that people can tell what it is without having to even open the file, let alone read what's in the file. That is very important, otherwise we'll get lost. When you're working on a project, especially if you're a new engineer, there's a lot of complexity. We can't handle it all. We need to put things in boxes, label the box, and lock the box. After that, we'll open the box only if we need to. And good naming is a black box. I don't need to click this frame producer to find out what it is. Moving on. Functions that perform an action like stop recording. Right? You can guess what it does. It will stop recording, stops the recording, right? On the other hand, you may have a function whose job it is to indicate that the recording has stopped. This is stopped recording. Notice the ed. If you call this function, the recording won't stop. In fact, the purpose of this function is to inform this analytics class that the recording has stopped, so that the analytics data can be uploaded to Firebase and so on. So sometimes you have functions which are imperative, where you're telling the function to do something. Those should be called stop recording. Sometimes you have functions which are informative, which merely exist as callbacks or notifications, right? You're just being told something has happened. In an e-commerce store, you may have a function place order and another function order placed with a D at the end. Moving on. Booleans should have some prefix like is or. For example, is raw photo. If you remove the is, it is ambiguous. If I call raw photo, do I get the raw photo? Or if I call file.open, does it open the file or does it tell you if the file is opened? If it's the latter, it should be file.isOpened. Always look at the call site to see if your naming is clear in that context. If you are using this, write some code. Let buffer equal to something. Print. What are you checking? Raw photo. If is raw photo. Do something. Does this look natural? Yes. So don't look at this and say it's a good name. Always write some sample code. Sometimes it may be odd here. So if it's a file. Now, what does this do? Does it tell you if the file is open? Does it open the file and if it succeeds, executes this code? It's a matter for interpretation, and that's bad. This is clear, right? So always look at the call site, write some sample code if there's no call site, and see if your naming was good. So Boolean should use is or has or should as the prefix. Is raw photo, or regarding in-app purchases, we have a property called is paid. It is what it sounds like. Has the user paid for the app? Or it can also be should. Should use HDR. Here, when we take a photo, you have all these parameters. We read these parameters to figure out how to take the photo. If this returns true, we'll capture a HDR photo. So Boolean should have some kind of a prefix. Anyway, these are some few tips on naming. Naming is very important to keep your code understandable and communicate. Code is read more often than it is written, so it needs to be optimized for the reader, not the writer. If you'd like me to work with your team, there's a link in the description.